G'day guys, welcome back to Connected. I'm Callum Martin and it's great to have you guys here with me at AVDC. In this episode of Connected, I'm going to be going through the design process for the Toyota 86's showcase sound system. Look, it's been fantastic to hear from you all after finally releasing episode 1 on the build of my Toyota 86 sound system. It's really exciting to get some responses from you guys, see what you think of the plans that we've got coming up. So last time I talked to you guys through my Toyota 86 and my plans to build a big sound system in there. So like I mentioned last time, we are going to be taking out the back seats of the car and doing a sound system build all the way from the front seats right through to the boot, which is fantastic. So we've got all that space to work with. What do we do with it? That is the next step, and that is of course the design step. I think an important thing to note at this stage is that the design process is not a fast one. I had been building ideas in my head about how I wanted to do the sound system in this car for about a year before I really got serious. And the thing is, when there's lots of small details to get right, you do just need time to go through it all. Sometimes the way you design the overall design will have an impact on how you execute the little details. But sometimes the little details will dictate how you do the larger design as well, and they do work together. It's possible to go right down the rabbit hole of the chicken and egg conundrum of, what to do first, but giving myself time has just worked well in this scenario to get those little details to work well with the overall design and vice versa. So the basic layout I wanted to try was with the subwoofers behind the front seats. Not firing at the front seats and not firing up, but actually firing downwards, which is a little bit unconventional. It's not something you see very often, but it's something I really wanted to try, especially in this car. There's a few little benefits I had in mind that I really wanted to see if this idea would work and give me the benefits that I was hoping for. So the twin 10-inch subwoofer box that you saw in the last video, which was a ported box, I sealed that off to create a sealed box and put it where the back seat was, facing down, so that the woofers were playing down where the seat bases were, just onto the floor pan of the car. And it verified that it was going to give me what I was after. There's a lot of little details as to how that works, but what I wanted to see is primarily if they would play really well in that location facing down, if they'd have really good output, and also what the scenario was like with rattles in the car. Like I say, this car is very lightweight and it's made reasonably cheaply, and it means that rattles are a consideration. And I found with the woofers playing downwards at the floor pan in the middle of the car, they were actually playing against very few rattling panels. It was a really solid sound without lots of rattles and stuff. So that was a really encouraging thought. And it gives me some opportunities to show off the woofers in a way that you can't normally do in a conventional install. I also have 2 amplifiers which are shown off best in portrait mode, that is vertically oriented. And I'm going to go into more detail about them next time, but that gives me a really good opportunity to lay these 2 portrait style amplifiers out in the boot directly behind the subwoofers, which are going to be where the rear seat base was. So that's kind of exciting. And it got me to thinking about how we tie that together with a visual style. That's where the equipment's going to fit, but how do we make it look like something? We can screw it to a flat panel and let that be that, but that's not really how I roll. So the more I thought about that arrangement of the equipment, the more the idea of some aeroform style shapes like you might find on a supercar really took my fancy. And there was one supercar in particular that really brought this idea together for me. It is the Porsche 918 Spider, which has an incredible looking rear deck with the top discharging exhausts, and the mesh designs and shapes in there was just absolutely mind-blowing. And I thought I'd double check it just to be sure. So I went to the Porsche Museum in Stuttgart in Germany and checked out a 918 for myself, which was pretty cool. And I just absolutely loved that aesthetic, especially with how things were laid out and everything. And that is the sort of feel that I really wanted to put into my sound system build, with the space that we had, with the orientation of the equipment and the stuff that I had to work with. I thought that was a beautiful opportunity to create something inspired by that, and to fit in with the look and the feel of the 86. So that was the scene, that was the shape, that was the look I wanted to create. And that means it's time to get on the computer and start drawing this down. So let's go have a look.
So the first step, of course, was to measure up the car, taking as detailed measurements as I could. Often had to come back to the car to make more measurements as we went, as well as taking photos of shapes and inputting them into CAD so that I could use their outlines to base my designs on. And of course, scribbling very accurate drawings of exactly what's going on so I could keep track of the measurements. So I took that all into CAD and started to draw some 2D models. Now, I'm no wizard at CAD. I use two-dimensional CAD. I'm sure some people could have done it in 3D, but this was more than good enough for my purpose. And you can see here that I am putting together the base of the floor as a cross-section from front to rear, and that's going to allow me to work out what space I have to put the woofer and what angle I have to put it on as well, which is quite important. So you can see me here playing around with the angle and the positioning of the subwoofer in relation to where the back seat goes. And that's really important, not only for the airspace for the woofer, but also the area underneath which it's going to play into. I considered a few different ways to do this, whether it would just play down onto the steel seat surface, but that is a really uneven surface, and I really wanted to give it something more predictable and something stronger to play against. So decided to make what I'm calling a loading chamber, which is essentially a wall opposite the sub that it can play into, which is feeding out the front towards the back of the front seat. So that's what I've been playing around with that. That was a big factor to determine. Now I've got everything laid out together, and I'm just determining the outline that I'd like to get with a curve along the top of the box, and also the angle where it meets the back seat. And with that in mind, the next step is to reduce that down to the outline of the box itself, because I need to work out the airspace that's going to be in there. If I know the width of the box and I know this area of this cross section, I can calculate the box volume. And that, of course, is imperative to getting that woofer to perform properly. And fortunately, after having a play around with the shape that I wanted, I'd arrived more or less at the box volume that I needed for the subwoofer, which is fantastic. I expected it to be a lot more fiddly and complicated than that, so I'm really happy to end up with that shape working the way I want it to. And here I'm messing around a little bit with some of the little details. So this is a cross section of the top edge of the box. And you can see that there's actually a lot of detail I need to figure out for the different materials and layers that are going to fit together up there. It's really critical that I have room for everything to work properly. And it's also important that I work this out now, because I can use that to my advantage. Having it all designed and checked on the computer means less work by hand later on. So getting all of that sorted out, it doesn't look overly interesting, it doesn't give you much of that aesthetic, but it does actually make sure that those details are going to work together with the overall look.
So with the car measured up and drawn in CAD, and the look I want in mind, it's time to combine the two and make them fit together, which is no easy task. It doesn't help that very few surfaces in the 86 are flat and parallel, but it's time to put it all together, make sure it all fits, and make sure that we have the space for everything to work together properly.
Okay, so here's where it gets a little bit more interesting. This is the more complete design cross-section where I'm happy with that box volume, and I've also got all these layers designed in and all the angles that I've arrived at. So it's a relatively complex thing at this point, but I've also worked out how my angles work around the front of the box, and along here it's really, coming along, and I'm also happy with the space that this is playing into down here and the overall height and profile of the box. So this is really starting to look good, and you can see some of these green lines I'm using to line up with the top view of it, which is also coming together quite nicely. You can see where that woofer is positioned and the amplifier respectively. So that's starting to look really good, but I'm sure you guys want an overall view to check out what that looks like, and I do have that as well. So here is the overall view, and that is pretty exciting in my mind. You've got the boot here and obviously the spare tyre well, and this is the back seat area. These are the armrests on the quarter panels, and this is the back edge of the center console, which was a big limiting factor here with the shapes I wanted to use. They had to fit between the side here and the center console. So this is where we're at, and it's really exciting. I mean, this is the look I was going for. It's hard to represent in lines sometimes and really visualize how it's going to turn out, but this is on the right track. I'm getting really happy about this.
So with that design laid out, with it all double checked and triple checked, it's time for me to send it all off for laser cutting.
So when it comes to laser cutting, it's really important to separate this design out onto the layers that I want cut. This is an overall concept. It isn't really suitable to cut on its own. So I went through a process of breaking all these shapes down into the different layers that I needed cut and templated. And we've got quite a few of them. Here's just some of them, along with some of my notes as to how they're all going to work together. But you can start to see the different pieces, the component pieces of this, and how they might work together. It might be hard to visualize at this point, but bear with me because it's a lot more obvious once I start building it. But there's a lot going on here, and it's all layered and come together well. And in fact, that's an overlay of all of the layers together and how they break down. So with all of that done, they were ready to go.
All of the parts of this design are getting laser cut out of MDF as templates for me to work with by hand back at the workshop. It's going to be a really good way to get that computer design into a form where I can work with it by hand, and that's going to become more obvious as the process goes on. But it's certainly a pretty nervous time committing to a design, sending it off to be laser cut, and hoping that it is going to turn out how you want. No matter how much work you put into every little detail, the proof is in the pudding. So getting that back from laser cutting and trying it out in the car is a very exciting prospect. You're going to have to wait until next time though to find out about that. Next time on Connected, I'm going to be trying out these laser cut designs in the car, and I'm going to be taking you through some of the fantastic equipment we're going to be using in this install, because that becomes relevant very, very soon. Thanks so much for joining us. I'd love you to leave a comment or a like, subscribe, all of those good things, and thank you so much for supporting our series here at AVDC.